Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to meet with you today to share some of the expertise of the Center for Applied Linguistics and how it relates to language teaching. CAL is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. and dedicated to promoting access, equity, and mutual understanding for linguistically and culturally diverse people around the world. Established in 1959, CAL has earned an international reputation for contributions to many fields, with a focus on the education of linguistically and culturally diverse adults and children. Thanks again for joining us today, whether you're here live or viewing the recording. We want to acknowledge the extremely important work you do to help adults acquire English. We know it can be a complicated job, and you pour your heart into it, and you make a huge difference in the lives of your students, so thank you. So this webinar will focus on the first four fundamental principles of effective adult education developed by Burt, Kennedy, and Kuhn for the Center for Applied Linguistics in 2015. The first four principles are building on existing assets, ensuring relevance to learners' needs, connecting to learners' goals, and connecting all communication modalities. And we will drop the document of those 8 principles in the chat. We like to start our professional development sessions with objectives. This way you can see what you should get out of this webinar, and we can reflect at the end of our session and assess whether we met these objectives. So at the end of this webinar, participants will be able to describe the first 4 principles of effective adult language education and apply them consistently in their teaching. You'll also be able to evaluate the assets students bring to the classroom and create engaging activities that reflect learners' assets, incorporate real-world relevance, and integrate multiple modalities of English. So let's start with Principle 1. Principle 1 is effective instruction builds on adult learners' existing assets.
Hey, thank you, Matilda. So I wanted to start talking about Principle 1 by talking about funds of knowledge. Funds of knowledge is a concept that was posited by Mall et al. In 1992, and it offers us a conceptual framework that's centered on the principle that the best way to learn about student knowledge is to focus on their lives and experiences. Adult learners have funds of knowledge. That's deep knowledge and understanding that they've gained through life experience. And as instructors, we can leverage this knowledge to help build a bridge to new learning. We take a strengths-based approach when we value the capacity, skills, knowledge, connections, and potential in individuals and communities. Prior experience and knowledge provide a framework for learners to attach new learning to. So when we're acknowledging our students' funds of knowledge and all that they're bringing with them to the classroom, we're also respecting their experience, respecting their knowledge, and that helps to foster a sense of trust and community within your classroom, which also helps students be more receptive to learning. Here are some things that you can do within the classroom to build on your students' existing assets. The first one is to foster an environment that is inclusive, safe, and respectful. Make sure you regularly ask about your students' lives and encourage them to share about their lives and their experiences. But a word of caution with that, we also want to make sure we're giving learners autonomy over what they share and how and when they share it. We also want to make explicit the links between the new content that we're teaching and previous experience that our learners have. Okay. Let's look at 2 activities that you can do that foster the principle of building on adult learners' assets. The first one we're going to talk about is a Google slide introduction. So when we're trying to build on learners' assets, it's really helpful to know what they're bringing with them, and getting to know your students, their backgrounds, their interests, and their prior experiences is one way to uncover the assets they bring to the class. So Google Slides introduction is an easy activity to do at the beginning of a new session. We will explain this using Google Slides, but this can also be done without technology. For Google Slides, you would assign one slide in a complete deck to each student and let them create the slide to reflect who they are. So some framing questions you might use are, what do you like to do? Where are you from? What do you value? What are things you have done in the past? And while they're working, teachers can walk around and help with certain vocabulary words that students might not know. So on the slide, you can see an example of a Google slide that I made. So the background represents where I grew up in New York. And then I have some images that represent my interests and hobbies, some things about my family, and some other images that represent my professional work and my academic background. If you don't have access to Google Slides, you can do the same sort of thing on a sheet of paper or cardstock, name tent style. So you would just fold the paper so that it can sit on a student's desk, and students would write their name in the center, and then add some images, drawings, other things to kind of reflect the things that are important to them and answer those framing questions. And again, they would take turns presenting their slide or their name tent to the rest of the class. What's nice about this activity is it has multiple points of entry for students of different proficiency levels. It helps to build a sense of community in the classroom, and it allows for presentation practice, so speaking practice and also listening practice. And to increase that listening practice, you could also have the students who are listening write down something interesting they learned about a classmate and then share out at the end of the presentation.
Great. Another great way to plan instruction that builds on learners' existing assets is to create a learner survey for each student. So you can scaffold the survey based on your students' proficiency levels. You can use simple sentences and images for students at lower levels. Another idea is to conference with students. Sometimes it is easier to talk or explain things one-on-one. And another idea is to have students interview each other, which is a great way for them to get to know their classmates. So here are some ideas for questions that you could include in the survey. You might need to pre-teach and practice some vocabulary and questions before students complete the survey. Now let's move on to Principle 2. Effective instruction is clearly relevant to adult learners' needs. So we want to note that our adult learners may have challenges meeting their basic needs. You can find resources and resource guides on United Way's sites or through 211. It could be helpful to keep an updated list of resources in your area that you can provide your students. We all know that learning is difficult, if not impossible, when students are worried about basic needs like food, water, shelter, and safety. I'm passing it on to Kate.
Yeah, thank you. So here are some things that you can do in the classroom to make sure that instruction is clearly relevant to your students' needs. The first one is make connections between instruction and life situations explicit. Plan activities that mirror the language functions of daily life, like giving or following instructions and directions, asking questions and listening for information, and collaborating in order to accomplish a task. Try incorporating authentic tasks that require students to communicate in order to solve a problem or complete the task. Let's look at 2 activities that foster Principle 2. Effective instruction is clearly relevant to learners' needs. So the first one that we're going to talk about is choice boards. So choice boards are really great for adult learners because they can help teachers differentiate instruction to better meet the diverse needs that are within the same classroom. Choice boards provide students with the power to choose how to learn a particular subject or concept and develop language simultaneously. They encourage students to be responsible, accountable, and independent in their learning. And they also allow students to work on activities at their own pace and build upon earlier linguistic knowledge. There are a lot of different styles of choice boards that you can create for your students. The one on this slide is an example of a tic-tac-toe style digital board that has links to the activities. And the nice thing about this is, in order to complete this activity, students would choose 3 activities that they want to do, either in a row or in a column or across the diagonal. And it's very easy to scaffold these activities. So for example, if you look at square 4 on this slide, it's to write an interview, thank you note for an interview. And there are some examples that are linked, but you could also provide a frame for the note. So you could provide a paragraph frame or a whole thank you note style frame for students to use, in addition to just the example. So in this example, the activities center on the same content or topic. In this case, it is applying for a job. But each activity requires different modes of communication, different dimensions of language, and focus on different learning styles.
And another activity relevant to learners' needs is the information gap activity. So in an information gap activity, students work in pairs. Each half of the pair has a partial set of information and must ask questions to their partner to get the information they need. So you can have students sit or stand ear to ear, but facing opposite directions. This way they can hear each other, but they can't see their partner's paper. In information gap activities, they can be built on functions that learners carry out in their daily lives, such as this example with the groceries. So you can see in the example, they also have sentence frames that they can choose from. They can practice the singular or plural. They can practice the verbs do and does. And it also provides practice with saying numbers as prices, and with grocery vocabulary as the words are not provided and they have to find the vocabulary for those words. And this is an example in a higher level. So the topic here is famous women. And so it could be this content or a wide variety of content. It could be really any type of graphic organizer, and maps also work well. But the idea is that students must communicate with each other to complete the task. Now let's look at principle 3. Effective instruction connects its methods with the adult learner's goals. So we want to encourage students to set clear goals for their language development. As you know, adults have a lot of demands on their time, and it can be difficult to prioritize language learning and practice in the face of needs that feel more pressing. Setting goals can help adults stay focused on the outcome and prioritize the smaller steps to get there. There will be setbacks and challenges and bumps along the way, but having goals can provide a roadmap to get back on track when setbacks inevitably occur. And passing it on to Kate.
Yeah, thank you. So here are some things you can do in the classroom to connect your instructional methods with your students' goals. The first is being really clear and transparent about the plan for the course and the overall goal or goals of the course. You can help your students set personal goals and show how they align with the class. Another really important thing that you can do is post an objective for each lesson, read it with the class at the start of the lesson, and then review it at the end of the class to assess whether or not the class met the objective. We're going to talk more about writing objectives in just a moment, but the last point to touch on here is the importance of modeling tasks. Model activities and tasks for your students and show them how these tasks will promote learning and move them toward their goals. So let's talk about 2 activities you can use to connect your teaching methods to your students' goals.
So you can teach students how to write SMART goals. So you can explain what each part of the acronym means. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And you can provide examples and models. You can write a class goal as an example and move through the SMART acronym to make sure it meets each criterion, and you can adjust the goal as needed. Goals often need a lot of revision to become effective SMART goals. Students can set both long and short-term goals, SMART goals. Long-term goals help keep the big picture in mind, and short-term goals can be the steps along the way. So here are examples of how you can help your students make their goals into SMART goals. So the first example is a long-term goal. The goal is, I want to speak better English so I can get a better job. And by asking questions about this general goal, you can help students get more specific. What is a better job? What kind of job would you like? What does it mean to speak better English? And how will you know that you've reached your goal? And answering those questions and thinking about it, you can end up with a SMART goal. I will improve my English listening and speaking skills to get a job as a health office manager in a year. Students can also create several short-term goals, and they can come from class goals. This short-term SMART goal, I want to have conversations in English, or more specifically, I want 3 short conversations each week in English about different topics. Those conversations can be practiced in class, and you can move towards, your students can move towards having those conversations outside of class. So they could be asking a question at the grocery store that they have practiced, or they can work up to calling a store or a restaurant to ask their hours, or have a conversation with their child's teacher or another parent or a coworker.
Hey. Let's talk about how you can use goals in your class. So as Matilda talked about, setting a class goal is a great idea, to set a SMART goal for the whole class so that you can model what goal setting looks like, and you can show your students what progress monitoring of that class goal looks like. You can also have students share their individual goals, even in small groups. When we state goals out loud and we share them with others, it's really good for accountability. It's also really good for support. We were talking about building an environment that's inclusive and warm and supportive. And this is a great way to help foster that, by having your students share their goals with each other so that they can hold each other accountable. They can celebrate wins together, and they can also support each other as they're moving towards their goals. Encourage your students to self-monitor their goals. So show them how they can check in and make sure that they're taking steps toward the goals that they've set for themselves. Another great idea is to, just at the beginning of the course, schedule some regular check-ins. So maybe 3 or 4 check-ins throughout the whole course. Have students meet in small groups and share how they're moving toward their goals, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then share out about that progress. Celebrate successes together as students are making progress, to keep everybody encouraged, and encourage resilience when those challenges inevitably arise. There's a lot of things that could happen. I think about the SMART goal we shared on the previous page about having 3 conversations a week. Maybe that student was only able to do 1 conversation a week. They're still making progress toward their goal, but maybe they can adapt the goal. Maybe 3 times was ambitious. It was just too much for right then and there. So I know adult learners are some of the most resilient people I know, so it's not too hard to encourage resilience. But we always meet challenges when we're setting goals. And so we want to help our students get back on track. And part of that is remembering that goals need to be flexible. So not only encouraging resilience if there's challenges, but also encouraging students to adjust their goals as they're moving toward them. If 3 times a week for conversation is too much, drop it down to something that's more attainable and celebrate that success. Circumstances change, a goal may no longer be appropriate. So that check-in and monitoring is a great time to also tweak and adjust those goals as students are moving forward. All right, so we covered goal setting for students in your class using SMART goals. Now I want to talk about writing objectives for your lessons. So this isn't really an activity for students. It's really more for you as a teacher, because you'll be writing the lesson objectives, but providing clear objectives gives your students a roadmap and will also help you frame your lesson plan. For example, when you have a clear objective, you can easily plan activities to meet the objective and think about the supports that your students will need for those activities. So you want to post your objectives where all of your students can see them. You want to read the objectives out loud at the start of class or have a student read them out loud. And then you want to review the objectives again as a whole class at the end of the lesson to assess whether or not you met them. So objectives, sort of like SMART goals, objectives need to be measurable and observable and also action-oriented. They can be based on the standards that you're using, whether you're using state standards or if you're using the OCTAE standards. Your objectives should be clear and written in language that your students can understand. And they should also be clearly supported by class activities. So you can notice on this slide that we have, this is not an exhaustive, this is just an example list of verbs. So some of the verbs like know and understand that show up a lot in objectives are not great choices for effective objectives because they're very hard to measure. We can't observe what someone knows or what someone understands. So they're not great choices for writing effective objectives. So here are a couple of examples of some objectives. Remember that these are very decontextualized. Your objectives are going to be fit to your students, your class, your standards, and your lessons. But here are a couple of examples of some objectives. So please notice that we have the verbs highlighted in blue. So we have write, orally list, and debate. It's a great idea to refer to the modality that you'll be using in an activity. So if it's primarily a speaking or a writing activity, if students are going to be discussing with a partner, to refer to those modalities within your objectives. You'll see in green that we've highlighted how the students will work. So it could be with a partner or in small groups. And in parentheses, you'll find some examples of supports you might include for your students, such as using sentence frames or a graphic organizer. These are in parentheses because they're going to change depending on your students and their needs. But you can incorporate those supports right into your objectives.
All right, let's look at Principle 4. Effective instruction integrates all communication modalities. So to achieve Principle 4 of integrating all communication modalities, here are some things you can do in the classroom. If you think about communication tasks we accomplish in our daily life, they typically involve more than one communication modality. So if your classroom tasks require authentic communication, they're likely to integrate multiple language modalities. You don't have to focus on each modality equally in every lesson, but you do want to balance them across lessons. You can use your learning objective to easily see what the focus of each past lesson has been to make sure you're bringing together all modalities across a unit or a group of lessons. Language development does not progress equally across reading, listening, and speaking and writing. You can encourage your learners to use their stronger modalities to support the development of weaker ones. For example, if writing is more difficult, you can use speaking to write or reading to write activities. And here's 2 activities to foster the integration of all communication modalities.
So Matilda, I'm sorry, I want to just jump in for a quick second because someone had a question about objectives. Alvina asked, should we have one main objective for the lesson or many small ones? Which is an excellent question. You can have one objective that might take a couple of lessons to accomplish. I think it's also a nice idea to have multiple objectives in your lesson that reflect the activities that you're going to be doing to kind of meet those objectives. I would say you probably don't want to have more than 3 or 4 per lesson. But I have seen it done where teachers will have a lesson that kind of, an objective that kind of covers not a whole unit, but like you might have 3 different lessons that are going to lead to this larger objective. So you could do it that way too. Personally, I like to break them down a little bit into smaller objectives in that case, because that way you can really build in those supports and you're kind of thinking through exactly what modalities your students are using. Are they primarily writing? Can I work in a speaking activity? Do I have the right supports for them? Am I providing sentence frames? How am I going to support their speaking? I think when you have more specific, smaller objectives, it's a little bit easier to build in those supports. Thanks. Hi, Matilda.
Thank you. All right, so the first activity, as an example for using all modalities, this activity is also an example of how to use a stronger modality to support weaker ones. So in the class story, students tell the class a personal experience that they've had, and the teacher models how to put that experience into simple sentences in writing. So the teacher writes them on the board, and then the teacher asks the class comprehension questions about the story. You can ask a variety of question types, so WH questions that are more open-ended, or you can ask choice questions like, did he go to the park or did he go to the store? Or you could ask yes or no questions. Afterwards, the students retell the story to a partner without looking at the board. So in this activity, you're modeling writing, and your students are practicing listening, reading, and speaking.
Okay. Another activity is a semi-scripted role play. Role plays are wonderful activities because they can mimic real life experiences and give students a chance to rehearse a situation that they're likely to encounter. In many cases, they probably have already encountered this situation. And role plays can also integrate all 4 modalities if the students are writing the role play themselves, which really depends on your students and the context of the role play. We're going to talk about a semi-scripted type of role play here. And so the students will be writing for this one. And to do this, you would choose any type of common interaction that occurs between 2 people. So it could be something like ordering at a restaurant, or having a conference with a child's teacher, or even scheduling an appointment or a doctor's appointment. It's semi-scripted because each participant will draft their own script, each half of the interaction, but they don't know how their partner is going to respond. So they have to listen and be ready to respond to new information. So while they're writing, it is really important to make sure we're providing supports as teachers. You could start by explaining the scenario that they're going to be writing the role play about, and then brainstorm as a class a list of vocabulary that you put on the board that they might need that would come up in the role play. You could provide sentence frames for certain turn-taking sentences during the role play, or you could even provide a general outline of what the interaction should look like. You want to model the role play with a student so you can show them how you're listening for information that your partner is giving you and changing what you're saying based on that information. So we have an example here. This example is on the topic of scheduling a doctor's appointment for a child. So one partner would play the role of the parent or caregiver, and the other partner plays the role of the doctor's office. So as you can see, each side will have to listen and adapt their responses when they get information from their partner. I like to have small groups work together to develop one role. So you might have 3 group A's who are developing the role of the caregiver. You might have 3 group B's developing the role of the doctor's office side, the person answering the phone at the doctor's office. After scripting, then you would pair 1A up with 1B. And if you have an odd number, you can always have one person take an observer role. They would share their observations of the listening and responding, and then they would rotate in and take a turn in the role play, and someone else would be the observer. For this example, I did provide kind of an outline of how they could script or what to expect for each part of the call. And those sentences in this script are labeled A through E, and they're in bold. And then as the students act out this role play, they now have practice writing, listening, active listening, because they really have to know what their partner's going to say, listen to what the partner's going to say, speaking, and also reading. And they've also had an opportunity to think through and rehearse a situation that they're likely to experience if they haven't experienced that already. I did see a question and a comment in the chat about, could this be done in an online class? And yes, it could. Someone said they've done it in an online class with the script writing part as homework. You could also, if you have access to breakout rooms, do a couple breakout rooms. Again, having people work together. Sometimes it's really helpful to hear other people's ideas for one side of the role. So if they were the parent side, maybe you forgot that they might ask you what your child's birthday is. But maybe another person in your group remembers that, and you can kind of try to walk through what you're anticipating the other person might ask you. So you could do that in breakout rooms, and then reset the breakout rooms so that A's and B's are together. And then it's always nice to have one person or one group kind of share out for everyone to observe. So again, with semi-scripted role plays, you may have to adapt a little bit if you have lower proficiency learners, but it can work really well to develop that active listening and speaking, and it's a great opportunity to start building confidence with interactions that students might have on a daily basis. All right, so this is our last activity that we are talking about for Principle 4. So I'm going to turn it over to Matilda to talk about our objectives.
Yes, so we're wrapping up the webinar. So let's review our objectives. So using Zoom and the thumbs up function, you can give a thumbs up if you feel like we met the objective as I read it out. So we had planned that by the end of this webinar, participants would be able to, 1, describe the first 4 principles of effective adult language education and apply them consistently in their teaching. 2, evaluate assets students bring to the classroom. And finally, create engaging activities that reflect learners' assets, incorporate real-world relevance, and integrate multiple modalities of English. And here are our references with the 8 fundamental principles that I think we were able to put it in the chat in a version where you had access. Apologies for that. And thank you again so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate that you took the time today to join us to learn about the first 4 of our 8 principles. I think Matilda's going to talk about our survey that we have.
Yes, so please take a moment to scan this QR code and follow the link that we'll also be putting in the chat to take our brief survey. So we are interested in learning more about your professional development needs. We have recorded today's webinar and we'll post it on CAL's website. Please let others know that they can see the recording and they can complete the survey. We do hope to see you all next week. So that's Thursday, November 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the next 4 principles. If you register for today's session, you will not need to register again, but the link will be in the chat if you need it and if you want to share it with colleagues. And again, thank you so much. And yeah, I don't know if you have a little time for questions or.
Yeah, we actually do. We tried to answer questions as much as we can as we went along, but we do have a little bit of time if you have any questions that we could try to answer. So I see a couple of a couple of questions about the slides. We're going to post the slides on line afterward, after the webinar, I think is correct. Is that correct, Althea?
That's correct.
So someone asked how to deal with multi-level students with some of these activities. So this is a great question. This is one of the, I think, the largest challenges, of teaching adult learners is that you tend to have a lot of people at different levels in your classrooms. And so that's where things like the choice board activity are really good, because you can add a lot of scaffolds in there. If your students don't need those scaffolds, they don't have to use them. But if they do need the scaffolds, those supports are there for them. You, of course, need to make sure you're showing your students how to use those scaffolds and supports, how to use sentence frames, or for writing, how to use even a paragraph frame that might have nice transition words in there for them. The idea is to try and build out an activity for your highest level learners, and then pull in the supports to support your support your learners who aren't quite as high. Sometimes it helps to pair students strategically. For some activities, you might want to have students who are working around the same level in that modality work together. Sometimes it can be helpful to pair someone who's a little higher with someone a little lower. We want to be really careful about not making that higher level student into a teacher and exploiting them all the time to be helping lower level students. But using heterogeneous grouping like that strategically can be effective. There are a lot of, it's a big challenge, but there are a lot of ways to help address the multiple different needs for students in your classroom. So I see Cecilia asked for content relevant for 0-level beginners. That's definitely something we can work on addressing for part 2. The principles are really just for effective teaching. So that's obviously teaching all students. So we will try to be more inclusive of those students who are really, really at a beginner level. There are so many different contexts in which adult ESL teaching occurs. So we'll do our best to, address a broader range of proficiency levels. Yeah. Somebody had asked, I don't know if they're still on, any suggestions for sharing objectives with a low level class? Yes, and in fact, maybe for the next time we can kind of model that for you. Yes, you may not be ready for words like evaluate or categorize, even if that's what they're going to be doing. But there are ways to scaffold your learning objectives, your lesson objectives with images. There's sometimes it's really helpful to even use icons. So those icons for writing or for reading, you can use them in your objectives. And then as you're teaching, you can kind of show that icon so that students are ready. Oh, this is the reading activity that we talked about. But yeah, there are ways to make the objectives accessible for lower level learners. So we can touch on that. Why it's important to share objectives with a class in advance. So at the start of the class, it's really helpful to me to share the objectives so that, especially as adults, but really for all learners, so that they kind of have an idea of where they should be going. It gives them some autonomy over their learning, so they understand, like, here's where we're starting. This is where we're trying to get by the end of this lesson, and here's how we're going to try to get there. We're going to do a writing activity. I'm going to work with a partner, and I'm going to have a graphic organizer. I'm not sure what a counter argument against presenting objectives. I'm a firm believer in having objectives for your lesson. So I don't know. I guess I could look up and see, I think the counter argument I've heard a lot is that they're very time consuming to write, and sometimes they're difficult to write so that all learners can understand them. So I think that could be one of the counter counter arguments to objectives. But if you have a counter argument to an objective, I would be happy to help you work on writing objectives. It depends. Creating overwhelm for students, it really should be just outlining what you're doing in class so that they know where they're going and how they're going to get there. But certainly a good point. The links of the slide don't work. Put the links in the chat.
Yeah, so clicking the slide itself doesn't work, but the one in the chat should work.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for doing the survey. We appreciate it. We definitely want to know more about your interests and needs in terms of professional development.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we can end the webinar. Althea, I don't know if you have any closing statements.
Thank you everyone for attending. The link for the survey is in the chat. I guess I will drop it one more time in case anyone has missed it.
And we'll send it via email too.
And it will go out, via email. But there it is again. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.